Welcome, fellow comic fans, to another edition of Wednesday Warriors, the show where I go through the weekly comic solicitations and pick out a few books that stood out to me that I feel are worth your time and money. I am your host, as always, Alex, and we've got ourselves one hell of a show tonight because DC and Image Comics in particular came out to play. And when I'm saying that, I basically mean that I have 9 picks total here for this week, and of those 9, 8 of them are combined DC and Image. I've got one Marvel book in there that looked really, really good, but I mean, just the slate of stuff that DC and Image have solicited for this week is insane. It's all a bunch of really good stuff, but if you're, a hardcore comics fan who's on a bit of a budget, watch yourself this week, because, I mean, this can really sneak up on you fast. So the first pick I've got is Batman Dark Knight The Master Race from Frank Miller, Brian Azzarello, and Andy Kubert. And this is the kind of anticipated, I remember this one being kind of controversial at the time, third chapter in the Dark Knight series, and I haven't read much of this one personally. I remember checking out the first issue, and from what I've heard, it's pretty good, especially in comparison to its previous entry, The Dark Knight Strikes Again, which is much more maligned from the general fan reception. This one generally has a positive vibe from what I've gathered from it, and is also packed with content. So this collects the 9-issue series and all of the mini-comics, which the solicitation says will be presented at the same size. And that is quite a bit of content if you either haven't picked up the third chapter in the Dark Knight series, or if you picked up the singles and you want to, get a nice little hardcover for your bookshelf. It's going for $29.99, which is actually a really fair deal for all that content provided in there. And I'm not going to pick it up just yet. The only reason I'm saying that is because I still need to read Dark Knight Strikes Again, and I should probably do that before I read Dark Knight Master Race. So definitely check that one out if you're a big Frank Miller and Azzarello fan. Next up, we've got ourselves Catwoman by Jim Balent, Book 1, which looks to be by Joe Duffy and Jim Balent. Now, what I find interesting about this solicitation is that it says Catwoman by Jim Balent, and Jim Balent is the artist. I'm imagining they did that because I guess Jim Balent is a higher profile creator than Joe Duffy. I mean, I've definitely heard of Jim Balent from some of the Nightfall issues I've read, but I have to admit I'm not familiar with Joe Duffy, so I guess point taken, DC. It seems to be set within the Nightfall and Nightquest era of the Batman comics, and that's probably why I'm going to pick this up alone right here, is because that era of Batman is always interesting to me, and I'm pretty much going to read just about anything from that era because, I don't know, it just seems to be the era that I am the most interested in reading, that 90s to early 2000s era of Batman. And this is collecting quite a bit of content. It's collecting Catwoman issue 0 through issue 14 for $29.99. For that much content, that's an absolute steal. So, if you're a fan of Catwoman and you're looking for some other content of the character out there, here you go. Next up for DC, we've got ourselves DC Meets Hanna-Barbera trade paperback. Some of the creators that are listed in here are Mark Andreyko, Steve Lieber, Ariel Olivetti, and it doesn't list any other ones, but I imagine there are probably some more in here. This is collecting some various one-shots, which are mostly focusing on, 4 one-shots involving Hanna-Barbera heroes in Adam Strange. For one story, we've got ourselves Booster Gold in the Flintstones. For another story, Green Lantern and Space Ghost, and Banana Splits with the Suicide Squad. And then there are also some other smaller backup stories in there as well. And personally, I'm not as attached to the Hanna-Barbera characters. There are a couple that I kind of followed as a kid, but at the same time, this just sounds like kind of a fun little crossover if that's something that you're into. And looks like it's collecting an okay amount of content, and it's going for $16.99. May not be at the top of the pile, given everything else that is going to be coming up this week, but hey, you know what? If you have some spare cash and this sounds like fun to you, you might as well go for it. And finally, for DC, we've got ourselves another crossover, which is Wonder Woman and Conan, issue 1 of 6, which is written by Gail Simone, art by Aaron Lopresti, and it looks like Derek Robertson did the cover for the first issue. And that just sounds awesome. I'm not sure if this is something that's been done before as far as DC crossovers go. I might not be a huge Conan fan, but for some reason the pairing of those two together just sounds like that's just made to be an awesome story. And plus the creative team involved is probably going to kick all sorts of ass on the book. It's going for $3.99, so feel free to check that out if you're more into single issues than trades. Now to Image, we've got ourselves Last Days of American Crime trade paperback, which is written by Rick Remender and art by Greg Tuccini. I do apologize if I butchered that, but that's at least my best guess at it. And this is a recollection from the Last Days of American Crime hardcover that was published way back in the day, probably a couple years back from Image. And I imagine this was probably a Rick Remender story even from the 2000s, because I remember that I think he had it published somewhere else before this. Either way, though, it's a really great crime science fiction story. I had read this a couple years back, and now that it's being resolicited, I highly recommend you guys check this one out. It's kind of on this, like it says, Last Days of American Crime. There's going to be something that will inhibit people from breaking the law, so a group of people try to commit a big bank heist before the inhibitor chips kick in. And this is a fantastic series. If you are a fan of Rick Remender and haven't tried out some of his older works, this is a great place to start. It is 3 issues, but don't let that deceive you. They are really thick issues, and it is going for $17.99. Definitely worth checking out. Also worth checking out the hardcover if you are more of a hardcover fan, which is kind of my soft spot, to be honest. After that, we've got Savage Town graphic novel from Declan Shalvey, Philip Barrett, and Jordi Belair. This is going to be a book that I'll be recommending solely based on the creative team associated with this book. I actually am not even familiar with Philip Barrett, to be perfectly honest, but Declan Shalvey is an amazing artist who is taking his, first steps towards writing, it seems here. And this is looking to be an Irish crime graphic novel. And there's not like a ton of details on this. It is a little vague. It's got a little bit of charm and solicitation to it. I'm not going to exactly read it off as is, but it looks like an up-and-coming gangster is looking to make a name for himself. And all these people are basically gunning for him, from local cops, rival gangs, his best friend, and his mom. And even the person writing the solicitation, apparently. If you want to get a kick out of it, you should probably read it. There's a little bit of a joke in there, but no need just repeating the joke. It looks interesting, though. I'm interested to try out some more of Shalvey's work, and this seems to be like a good place to do it. It doesn't mention how many pages it's going to be for this, but honestly, I'm such a fan of crime comics, I'll likely pick it up this weekend. It's going for $16.99. Feel free to flip through it and see what you think of the book. This would be a good place to start with Declan Shalvey if you haven't tried out any of his Moon Knight or anything else along those lines yet. After that, we've got ourselves another OGN. It's Son of Shaolin, and looks to be a kung fu comic set in Harlem, New York. An aspiring street artist is struggling to make ends meet, and then kind of learns about his Shaolin past and trains in kung fu to protect himself from the Red Fist, who is apparently set on wiping out his family's lineage. This might be one of those books where you may want to flip through it to get a sense of the artwork, since I'm not terribly familiar with the creative team. The creative team that seems to be attached to this right now is Jay Longino and Con White. The cover seems really interesting for this, and I love myself a good kung fu story just like I love myself a good crime story. Definitely feel free to flip through it, see if it seems to be up your alley. This is another OGN going for $16.99. It's also kind of funny in the solicitations, they do make a point of saying that it's being optioned for a film and being produced by The Rock. And I'm not exactly sure why you would put that in a solicitation. That doesn't exactly matter too much, I guess, other than, well, I guess it's being made into a movie already, so I guess someone saw something in this premise, so that's cool. And I mean, like I said, I'm definitely down for checking out another kung fu story. Just seems kind of funny they would attach that into there. But yeah, feel free to check it out. And once again, a lot of options this week, and we're not even done yet. One last Image book to talk about, and that is Sons of the Devil, Volume 3 by Brian Buccellato and Tony Infante. And this is a series I actually got caught up on last weekend, actually. This is basically a series about kind of a Charles Manson-like cult, where like in the past, a major incident happened. I'm going to try and keep it a little light on spoilers, just for the sake of it. But yeah, basically they had their own little commune, and it got raided by the feds, and all these kids got separated. And the main character's trying to find out about his past. He's trying to reform himself. He's had a bit of a rough life. And now it looks like while he's trying to, re-find his lineage, some kind of creepy stuff starts happening. It's sort of like that walks the line between overtly supernatural and just being kind of implied supernatural. It may go full out supernatural for Volume 3, though, since it started to arguably get there at the end of Volume 2. And Volume 3 does appear to be the end of the series with this one. It does say the third and final chapter, so this would be a good place to, pick up the other two just to, finish the series off if it's something that's always interested you. It is a little light on issues from what I'm seeing here. At least going off the solicitation, you may want to double check the trade itself to make sure there's not a mistake here. But it's collecting Sons of the Devil issues 11 through 14, and it's going for $16.99. And that's a little light, unless there's a really thick issue. So once again, double check the trade just to make sure that's correct on the site. That something just sounds a little off about that to me. But I have enjoyed the series up to this point, so I will likely pick that up really soon just to kind of round it off into my collection. And finally, we've got ourselves a Marvel comic to talk about, and it is the Daredevil Heart of Darkness Epic Collection. This is collecting a portion of the Ann Nocenti and John Romita Jr. run. So, obviously, the writer is Ann Nocenti, artist is John Romita Jr. for the bulk of it. And this is dealing with the storyline where Daredevil is caught in the middle between a feud with Mephisto and his son Blackheart. And to be honest, I'm actually not as familiar with this run. It's kind of a run that's like in that odd between Bendis and Miller gap, but everyone does seem to have a very high regard for the Ann Nocenti and John Romita Jr. stuff. I'm not sure if this is where it starts. I think there might be another Epic collection before this. But since they're finally getting around to collecting some of this stuff, I think I'll get into the Nocenti stuff really soon. This is collecting, just to be specific, Daredevil 271 to 282, Annuals 5 and 6, material from the Punisher Annual 3, Incredible Hulk Annual 16, Silver Surfer Annual 3, and that's it, actually. All of that's being collected for a total of $39.99, and as far as that goes, that's maybe a little pricey, but then again, the annuals are pretty thick, typically, especially from like the old school 80s Marvel era. So that could be worth the full price buy. You may want to just be careful with that, because the Epic collections are usually a little pricey for my taste, but this is a pretty interesting era of Daredevil from what I've heard. So if you're looking to check out some more Daredevil stuff besides the Bendis and Brubaker and Miller era, this may be worth checking out. And that does it for this week. Like I told you, just a real stacked lineup we had here with books. So feel free to like and share and subscribe to this video if you are looking for more comics content like this. And also feel free to leave a comment below letting me know what books you are planning on picking up this week, whether it's these or, anything else. And thank you once again for your time, and I will see you guys again next week.